Okay, so here we are to talk about Empress Wu. And she had a number of titles as she went through her stages. She was born, became a concubine at the age of somewhere between 12 and 14, variably reported like absolutely everything else about her. So if you know something different than what I say, stay calm, be assured I have read it somewhere in the book and trust it not at all. So anyhow, then she rose in the ranks. She became, instead of a bottom rank concubine, she was moved up to, I think, second rank. Then, unfortunately, the emperor at that point died. She became a Buddhist nun, not on her choice, but that's what happened to them. She was found by the emperor's son. She became his consort. Later, she became an empress, and eventually she became an emperor. Now, I should mention that we're very strong about gender, and I sometimes wish we weren't, because if we were like the Chinese, who don't make much difference between the pronouns she and he, we would spare ourselves a lot of trouble. But Empress is the wife of the emperor. After he dies, she became, as Wu did, the dowager empress, which is pretty much a British term. Then she decided to start her own dynasty, and she became an emperor. Now, the wife of an emperor is the empress. An emperor is the one at the top, and she was China's only female empress, which is why she's important. Now, given the lack of material about her, I mean, we're talking 7th century here, a teeny bit into the 8th, just a teeny bit. And given the fact that for a long time, she was totally ignored. You can pick up a book on the imperial history of China, is one I have, and she is not mentioned, nor her sons, nor is her dynasty. Suddenly, she's become pretty much of a feminist icon. And so while you will hear a number of bad things about her from the past, you will also hear a number of good things about her in the current. Now, it's a question of take what you like, try to put things together logically, and try to keep your sanity if you're trying to do a research for a talk. So anyhow, let me get on to the picture here. The picture is one of Wu. I'm going to call her Wu, no matter what her real title is, so we can at least stay on the same page. These drawings, they may be contemporary, but they're all from a 18th century English book, and many of them come without attribution. So I thought I would include another picture, which of course is her, but it's the take from the serial of the Empress Wu, which of course is 95% Disneyland, but it's a cool series. And if you want to watch it and you don't know Chinese, there are subs. Let us continue. I went to NYU, and it was great for the Greeks, the classical civilization, and the Reformation. I never heard the names Ashoka, Babur, Chitri Huangdi, or Confucius in a classroom. There was kind of a nod to Muhammad and Islam, but only because of the Crusades. Nobody writes textbooks for classes that don't exist. And by the way, I checked the catalog, it isn't any better today. Or translates source material that nobody will read. There's a fair amount about India because the British needed that information to make their colonialism more effective. But the first American translation of Mahabharata was an act of love. A rich guy, William Benson Buck, decided to hire with his own money and no expectation of ever selling the thing to make the translation. Now, when you're doing research on China, you have to put up with the fact, and I'm trying to prepare people who will go from this talk and maybe be curious and trying to do something themselves. There are two major means of translating Chinese sounds into the alphabet we use. And depending on the date of the book, you will encounter one or the other. So when you want to look up the person in the book, in the index, you will find that person anywhere. The person that I naively used to call Cao Cao, in Pinyin is Cao Cao, and in Wade Giles, it's Sao, and I hope I made that initial T. And so you will find it in an index under T, under C. Place names also have changed over time. Chang'an was pretty much put together during the Sui Dynasty, and it was previously Xian under the first emperor. This is in addition to the usual problem. Writers of biographies tend to take sides, and I think I covered that. The golden rule in the palace at the time, well, throughout history, I think in China, was do it unto others before they do it unto you. The rivals followed that rule. Following that rule was generally a matter of survival. Okay, this is all to say that I'm going to subject you to a lot more background material than I usually do. Because if we're going to understand Wu and who she was, we have to know the universe she lived in, both the physical universe and the human universe. Now, first I'll say something about the cycles of Chinese history, and bear with me, you probably know all this. It's divided into dynasties and periods. Dynasties are time periods where the central leadership remains in the same family, like the Plantagenets or the Tudors in England. I should point out that the family name in China is the one that comes first. So if we're talking about Henry Tudor, they would call him Tudor Henry. The family name of the Tang Dynasty emperors was Li. Periods are periods of disunion. A good example is the Three Kingdoms period that I was talking about before. It succeeded the Han Dynasty around 220. During that period, three different parts of China were almost constantly at war with one another. And I watched the serial, and I suggest you do too. It's a fun and painless introduction to the period of Chinese history. However, war is not painless. Maybe the generals enjoyed it, but not the starving people. When their fields were trampled and their cattle stolen by hungry soldiers, or the people who got slaughtered in a village because they were at a point of dispute, or, they would do civil engineering on a river to send it right through the town and make a flood and drown everybody. That was procedure. And meanwhile, as the armies marched and countermarched, the people suffered and their sons died in battle by the tens of thousands. Now, it's current practice for historians today to say, oh no, that was terribly exaggerated. They could not have had forces that big. Well, they were pretty clear in the Chinese histories, and they're pretty compulsive about writing things down. And yes, there were things like that. I recently read a book of a woman who was doing a hiking tour up north where it's kind of desert, and she was going over a sandy part, and she kept stepping on these humps of sand. And one time her foot went through and it encountered something sharp that broke. And she scraped away and it was a bone. What she had stumbled on was an old battlefield. And there was the remnants of the people who were the soldiers who were killed there. Well, Out of the chaos, a leader would eventually emerge. By luck, in one case, it was marriage to the daughter of one of the leaders. Sometimes it was bribery, trickery. Sometimes they were just fabulous generals. And that person would start a dynasty. Maybe many of the dynasties had absolutely centuries of prosperities and peace, like the one Wu lived in, the Tang. Some dynasties lasted only a couple of decades. Succession went to the firstborn son of the emperor, who did not necessarily inherit his ability or his will to govern. Particularly when things were going quite well, some emperors withdrew into the pleasures of the palace, which were plenty, and didn't even show themselves in court. Others became megalomaniacs. They got on grandiose building projects, one after another, to help drain the treasury. Another path to bankruptcy was by way of deciding to do territorial expansion and military excursions. If you were lucky, the good expansions were good, and you got income from states that became tributary states, but some were disastrous. Two emperors widely separated in time became obsessed, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, with becoming immortal, and sent out expeditions and did all kinds of things to try to become so. And of course, there was always corruption. When there's money flowing, people learn how to put it in their pockets. The ultimate source of income, of course, was taxes on the people. And when it became so awful that people were going hungry or running away, natural disasters, mostly floods or drought, would wipe out the crops. There would start to be bandits, and they would live by stealing things and pillage, and they would unite under warlords when they thought they found a good one. And these warlords would fight each other using the erstwhile peasants. And sometimes they would coalesce, and sometimes units of the government would join them. Eventually, a leader would emerge triumphant, and the dynastic cycle would begin all over again. Here's a palace, and it is the Daming Palace. It was not a lovely building in a park like Versailles, or you've been lucky enough to see the Summer Palace in St. Petersburg. It was a complex of several square kilometers in which literally thousands of people lived and worked. The heart of this complex was the emperor, surrounded by his family, and in widening circles, his harem, eunuchs, ministers, and scholars. Thousands of menials and officials saw to the provisionings, the meals, the gowns of the harem, and other domestic duties. The ministers who advised the emperor lived in residences near the palace. The scholars who assisted the emperor in writing his decrees and memorials and kept the records for the kingdom were housed further afield. This is pretty much how a palace would be. Okay, now the person who did these pictures, and quite possibly the portrait of Wu, if it is her, and if he did it, was Jan Lieben. And he was actually a prime minister, and this is pretty good drawing for a prime minister, I think. The harem was strictly ranked. Each rank had a prescribed number of members. Under Emperor Taizong, the empress was at the top, and beneath her, 4 consorts, 9 concubines. There were 108 other concubines in 4 descending ranks. Concubines could win promotion. Taizong was very fond of his empress, who predeceased him, and it's quite possible that he didn't have relations with all the women. In 662, Empress Wu revised the number down, this is when she became an empress, from 108 to reduce competition down to 22, and her husband, Emperor Gaozong, was too sick to protest. Women were recommended for the harem. Maybe she just did it to save money. and almost all were happy to be selected, the few exceptions being those with a childhood sweetheart. A preferred consort could influence the emperor in favor of her family. There was fierce competition among the women for the emperor's bed. And if you love soap operas, you can see these in the serials. Besides the emperor, the only male contacts with the harem women were their male children up to a certain age, and eunuchs whose main job in the harem was ensuring that the emperor paternity remained unquestioned. Eunuchs were deprived of all external genitalia. They were employed throughout the palace and personally attended to the emperor. Eunuchs were often volunteers who saw no other way to live or aspired to the palace life. Boys whose parents were too poor to feed them were given up to become eunuchs. War captives were often made involuntary eunuchs. Eunuchs sometimes became particularly favorites of the emperor. And there was one horrible example of a eunuch's undue influence that led to the slaughter of an entire Chinese army and the captivity of the emperor. Eunuchs could achieve high status. The grand historian, or they started there, who started there, Sima Qiang, got on the wrong side of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty, who sent him a bottle of poison and a knife. And he could kill himself or live on as a eunuch. He chose the humiliation of castration, and it was such. They had nasty names for them, etc., because he'd promised his father to finish the history of China, which he did. The celebrated Ming Dynasty explorer Shen He was a eunuch. Eunuchs were frequently involved in harem politics and occasionally became powerful enough to threaten the other branches of government. Murderous purges of the eunuchs as a result or prevented took place from time to time. And we will have a bunch of slideshow. Eunuchs by the same artist. You'll notice they're all wearing the same hats. Let me continue. And here is the examination. Scholars were usually recommended by their schools for participation in the imperial exams, which were based on classic literary text and the writings of Confucius early in this period. Successful candidates served in the palace or were appointed to local government offices throughout China. At the beginning of the Tang, only the sons of nobles were admitted to the examinations. One of Empress Wu's reforms was democratizing admission. The palace duties of the scholars might include custodianship of the vast libraries or researching and drafting all kinds of written communication for the emperor. They might rise to become ministers. Yes, and here is a minister. Here are three ministers conferring with an emperor. This particular emperor happens to be Wu's grandson. At the beginning of the Tang Dynasty, a new system of departments and ministers were put into place to kind of streamline things. And I don't think I need to go into that in great detail. But I'd like to skip ahead now to the Sui Dynasty. And that will be at the, yes, here I am. I know these guys. It was one of the shortest. The first emperor, Wendi, you can see he's kind of traditional. He's got that, like the hat that you have when you're graduating. And he was Wendi. And he was the first emperor. And I was talking about his hat, which is this mortarboard hat. And early on, those hats would have strings that would go in front of the space of his face because the emperor was so special, nobody was supposed to look exactly on his face. And here's his bum son, Nandi. And when Wendi had done a really lot of great things. He'd done military miracles to reunite China, for example, after the Northern and Southern dynasties. And he found and he listened to competent ministers, which didn't always happen. And he gave balanced representation to both the South and the North to prevent it falling apart again. He revived the equal field system, which gave each male's family enough acreage to feed themselves. It was around 7 to 12 acres. 20% reverted to the government when the owner died, but some was kept in perpetuity. Wendy's reign lasted from 581 to 604. His son, Yangdi, favored the South, employed 2 million conscripts to build Luoyang, which was kind of a lost cause because it was always getting burnt to the ground before and afterwards. At very great cost, he persisted in his father's single unsuccessful campaign, which was really against what we today call Northern Korea, which refused to pay homage to China. That prompted Yangdi to cook the Korean ambassador and give him to the soldiers to eat. By the way, Yangdi's wife murdered a girl with whom Yangdi had fallen in love, and she suffered no consequences whatsoever. I mention this only to make plain the kind of social interactions that took place in Chinese palaces, like the one that Wu would now call home. Yangdi fortunately lasted only 13 years to 617. At that time, General Li and his brilliant son, Li Shimin's exploits, including rescued when Yangdi's would-be invading force when they were trapped in a small village beyond the wall by an army of Eastern Turks under Shivi Khan. Putting flowers on a dead tree as one of the stratagems, well known, Li Shimin spread his small force over miles. They deliberately raised clouds of dust. Poor guys must have been coughing like mad on purpose and made a lot of noise as they bore down on the village. The finishing touch was a letter from Shivi Khan's wife, who was a Chinese princess who was secretly still loyal to her homeland, to the Khan, saying that his enemies were attacking his northern flank. The Turks withdrew to confront the non-existent threat. So when an itinerant prophet told Yangdi that he would be deposed and replaced by somebody named Li, he exterminated a number of people of that name, but he had no suspicion of the ones who had saved him. It was a serious mistake. And this is the geography of Li Yuan's rebellion, which I will get to in a minute, but people like to see maps. And so Beijing is about over here, and Shanghai is right about down here, and Chang'an or Xi'an is right about here, and here is Luoyang. And so they were ranging all over the place, as you can see, through desert, through fields, and well, anyhow, now you know where they were. There's really no need to go into all the brush fire rebellions that exploded when this way continued to disintegrate, but you can see every one of these names is one of them. Finally, the writing on the wall was like 6 feet high. Li Yuan got the message and killed the 2 officers under him still loyal to Yangdi, and appointed one Wu Shiyue as the staff officer of his army. Li Yuan and Li Shimin's forces were joined by other armies. Even Shivi Khan volunteered to join the horde, but his overtures were rejected sensibly. They didn't need him, and I think they didn't want him. Chang'an fell in 617. Even Li Yuan's daughter, Princess Pingyan, was in on the kill with her own army of the lady, and there's a woman I would like to research. Yangdi became retired emperor. He was deposed, and an 8-year-old grandson of Yangdi was installed as Emperor Gangdi, to make it all legal, of course, but Li Yuan was the regent. Per standard operating procedure, Yang Di was killed the following year by one of his own generals, by the way, and Gang Di was deposed, and I hope he was taken care of, but he was probably killed. Li Yuan declared himself emperor of a new dynasty. We know him by his posthumous name, Gao Su. And there he is. Looks pretty impressive guy, I must say. Okay. Now, a little bit of the history that actually starts to affect Empress Wu. Let's return to Wu Zetian, mentioned above. He is important because 6 years after the start of the Tang, his wife, Lady Yang Di, gave birth to a daughter who was so insignificant, there is no record of her given name. Wu Zetian had become wealthy selling lumber to Yang Di for his extensive building projects. Those projects had contributed in no small part to the fall of the Sui, as 2 million unhappy conscripts were forced to build them. The costs added to those of the unsuccessful Korean adventures had pretty much bankrupted the country. Well, Wu Zetian would like to have been ennobled along with his family. I mean, that was everybody's dream. But he needed to be something more than a merchant. He had been very rich, but money isn't enough. It was a profession looked down in China at this time as having no intrinsic value. Didn't make anything useful, it didn't grow food, and it didn't kill anybody. The quickest way was to join the military, which he did, and he worked his way up to the rank of military commander. He became particularly close friends with Li Yuan, and so when Li Yuan raised the flag of rebellion, Wu signed up. Upon achieving his aims, Li Yuan didn't forget to reward Wu Zetian, who received the title of Duke of Yi. Yay, he's finally a noble, as well as a manor house, 3 million coins, so it is reported, 200 horses, 5,000 rolls of silk, and 2,000 barrels of grain. He even got a job with a juicy salary, vice minister of the etiquette department. Li Yuan arranged a marriage for him with a 40th year spinster, cousin of Yang Di, Lady Yang, a very important family. And one of the 3 daughters from this union was Wu, born in 624, our Yu. Little Wu was taught to read and write, to paint, write poetry. Here's one of her poems. I love it when we can actually have the words of the person we're investigating. Tomorrow morning, I will make an outing to Shangling Park. With urgent haste, I inform the spring. Flowers must open their petals overnight. Don't wait for the morning wind to blow. The energy and impetuosity is clear even after 1,400 years. As she grew, she became beautiful. Meanwhile, the regime was changing. Li Shimin was gaining rock star acclaim for his military victories. His brother, Li Juanxing and Li Yuanxi, were also generals, but they differed significantly from Li Shimin. They preferred spending their time with the palace women. Besides the harem, there were like 3,000 women working in the palace to be investigated. When the Eastern Turks threatened a serious incursion, the brothers advocated abandoning Chang'an, which was their capital, burning it, and fleeing to a new capital some 250 miles to the southeast. Even the emperor was leaning this way, but Li Shimin opposed the plan and convinced his father to stand firm. Li Shimin began to reinforce his command over the main army stationed in Luoyang, and this worried his brothers, who invited him to dinner, after which he nearly died of food or other poison. The rivalry among the brothers continued, with advisors on both sides counseling immediate action. This was ultimately precipitated when Emperor Gaozong placed a large part of Li Shimin's army under the command of Li Yuanji in preparation for an expedition against the Turks. His forces reduced, Li Shimin realized he had to act or be killed, as I said before. He responded with the incident of the Xuanwu Gate. Incident is the usual translation of what Chinese word is used for these events. Now, to me, incident is a fender bender in a parking lot, and not the extermination of the most important clan in China, at the Gaopeng tulips, or the loss of 50,000 Chinese soldiers to a force of 10,000 eunuchs. Xuanwu Gate wasn't as apocalyptic as those, but it saved the Tang. Li Shimin made a formal accusation to his father that his brother had enjoyed sexual relations with members of the official harem. Gaozong was forced to react to such a serious accusation, so he summoned brothers 1 and 2 from their camps in Chang'an. Just inside the Xuanwu Gate, Li Shimin arranged an ambush. Li Shimin dispatched Li Shimin with an arrow. The other brother, Li Yuanji, nearly strangled Li Shimin with his own bow, but Li Shimin was saved by his men. Li Yuanji and his 3 younger brothers were also killed. The brothers' sons were executed later, and this would be Li Shimin sitting on a pile of his dead brothers. He got 5 of them. So 2 months afterwards, Li Shimin persuaded Emperor Gaozong to resign and took the throne himself, his posthumous name, Taizong. Wu would become his concubine when she was between 12 and 14 years of age. According to some sources, her name on entry was Meinyang, charming girl Wu. Other sources make no mention of this name. I like it. And here she disappears for the next 10 years. At some point, she was given the rank of siren, which means lady of talent. Talent at this time referred to kind of skills associated not so much with the examinations for which the women were ineligible in any case, so may or may not have meant that they could read or write with beautiful calligraphy. And the job descriptions of the ladies of talent may or may not have included chores that took advantage of their knowledge of reading and writing. According to Norman Rothschild's biography of Wu, she was assigned to keeping the records of furnishings in the women's apartments. No source is cited for this, so she may have been simply a sexual convenience. There is a story about her. It goes like this. This is when she was very young. Taizong had bought a horse of enormous stature, which nobody could tame. When Wu heard about the horse, she volunteered to tame it if she were given an iron whip to whip it with, an iron bar to beat her with, and a dagger. She said she would first whip it, then beat it with the bar, and if both failed, she'd cut the horse's throat. Everybody laughed. It was a cute answer coming from a kid. They didn't know her yet. However, at some point, Wu must have been a threat to somebody. An unnamed astrologer, probably primed by someone who didn't like our girl, had a prophecy that after 3 generations, the Tang would be supplanted by a female ruler, a martial king who will possess the empire. Well, he was actually right, of course. For some time, Wu was in serious danger of extirpation, but eventually Taizong, who was fond of her, found a general whose name was Wu, which is the same character, I'm told, as Marshall. I don't know these things, and whose childhood nickname was Fifth Girl. Maybe they were expecting one, and he got that name in utero. And our Wu was saved. The general was first demoted and later executed. Oh dear. Concubines could be given away or sold. My favorite story about Taizong concerns a counselor whom Taizong wanted to reward with a gift of some girls. The counselor's wife got very angry and forced him to decline the gift. Taizong sent her a bottle labeled poison and an imperial decree that she must drink it if she continued to refuse. She bravely did as directed and lived since it was only vinegar. It's funny, but it's not so funny when you remember that she expected to die. Real poison would have been quite normal at this time in China. Taizong's death was preceded by a period of illness, during which he was confined to bed. His sickness and death at the comparatively early age of 51, early age, were attributed to pills prescribed by one of the palace doctors, but this was never proved. He was visited daily by his son and designated heir, Li Shimin, who would succeed him as Emperor Gaozong. Wu was also present at the bedside, either because she had to report to him or else Taizong simply enjoyed her company. Amazingly, nobody has accused her of poisoning Taizong to free her for his son. All of this is controversial. Li Shimin, who succeeded Taizong, was not his firstborn son. He was the ninth. He had been sickly since childhood and was a gentleman and pacific compared to either of his two older brothers. The tradition of designating the firstborn was very strong in China, and Li Shi's brothers had military exploits to their credit. So why did Taizong make this unusual choice of successor? Well, his firstborn, Li Chengqiang, was very strange. Leaving aside the matter of his sexual preference, he identified with the Mongol DNA that that family had. He camped out in a nomad tent, had his men steal cattle from nearby peasants, and barbecued the cattle on the palace grounds. The second son, Li Tai, favored his Chinese side. He was very studious, he was very intelligent, but obviously jealous of his brother, who would normally succeed his father as emperor. Sons 3 through 8 were children of concubines, so they really didn't count. Li Shi had been born to Empress Wu. Taizong knew he was dying and perhaps facing a final judgment. His thoughts may have turned back to the Xuanwu Gate, and he didn't want his sons to die in a repetition. Making either of the two oldest sons his heir ensured the other's violent death, and that of the gentle ninth son, who could be seen as an alternative. In the end, his choice was forced. Li Tai, number 2, rather stupidly spread a false rumor that Taizong intended to make him crown prince. His brother believed the rumor and attempted to depose Taizong, who put the rebellion down and exiled both of them. Gentle Li Shi, number 9, became crown prince and after the emperor. So now we come to love in the monastery. Li Shi visited his father daily until his death in 649. He may have met Wu there since she was helping with his father's care. After Taizong died, all of his consorts and concubines were immured in a Buddhist monastery, since after intercourse with the emperor, nobody was supposed to touch them. Taizong's empress had predeceased him by 11 years, and he never chose another. Wu was among those enforced nuns. Their hair was shaven, and they were put to menial tasks, which roughened their hands, and required to adhere to Buddhist rules, including dietary ones, and prohibition of lovely costumes and cosmetics that they were used to. And over here, I missed a couple of pictures of Taizong. He's now entertaining the Korean ambassador. I hope it wasn't the one who got cooked. We can tell that it is Taizong, the emperor, because he is seated and the Korean, It's a Tibetan ambassador, not a Korean one. Okay. And let me continue. And here is our last picture of Taizong, and this is from his cave. And this is his favorite horse. This is from his tomb, and this is from his favorite horse. And here we have a current day Buddhist nun. And as you can see, her hair is just barely growing in. And she really doesn't look as glamorous as we have seen Empress Wu in her earlier reincarnation. And here's a picture of the monastery, the Ganyu monastery, in which Wu was immured. And here is a little gargoyle statue from that monastery, looking very sad. And here we have Gaozong. Nobody knows if Gaozong fell in love with her before his father died. Even if she hadn't had relations with Taizong, it would have been adultery for anyone to touch her before his death, since she was officially his wife in concubine status. And if she had, it would have been incest before or after he died for Gaozong to approach her. Whatever she told him, whatever he believed, I should note that although Taizong fathered 49 children on multiple partners, there are no birth dates listed after 632. At least in Wikipedia, as reliable as it is, when he was only 35 years of age. Wu entered the harem in 637. She was then between 12 and 14 years of age. There may have been physical factors involved. My armchair diagnosis, other than her extreme use, would be diabetes, both for Taizong and Gaozong, who also died early. At least in our era, China has one of the world's highest incidence of diabetes, along with India, and the problem is worse in the north. Taizong and Gaozong had nomad DNA. I doubt that wine and high living emperor style helped. Erectile dysfunction is a late consequence of diabetes. So are headaches, strokes, and blindness, all of which Gaozong suffered from. Well, Gaozong already had a wife, Empress Wu. She'd never conceived, perhaps because Gaozong seldom sought her company. She was the choice of his father for dynastic reasons, besides the beautiful, pure consort Zhao and others were absorbing his energy. Empress Wu worried that she might be deposed and replaced by the consort, so she adopted Gaozong's first son, born to a lowly concubine who was only too glad to give him a chance at the succession. The adoption exacerbated the rivalry between Wu and Xiao. Bringing Wu to the palace posed a formidable challenge. Gaozong was very much in love with her. He had no children other than by her after 650, but the scandal would have had enormous consequences if it hadn't been for the intervention of the empress. She felt Gaozong distancing himself. He'd fathered 3 children on consort Zhao in 687, 88, and 89. Empress Wu knew all about the monastery visits and had what she thought was a brilliant idea. Sounds like some of mine. If Wu came back to the palace, then Gaozong would turn away from consort Xiao, and Wu would just be a passing fancy. After all, she was 4 whole years older than Gaozong. Wu totally supported the importation of Wu. Of course, Gaozong was delighted to find his emperor so dedicated to his happiness. And so in 653, Wu and her son, born in the monastery, came to the palace. She entered as only second-rank concubine, and that would get fixed. The Empress soon realized her mistake. Gaozong didn't tire of his new love on schedule. The palace divided in three factions: pro-Wu, pro-Wang, pro-Xiao. The pro-Wus were mostly commoners. The nobles supported Wang. To defend herself, Wu bribed the eunuchs and the maids to spy on the consort and the empress. Whenever possible, she put in a bad word for them with Gaozong, being careful that it was always true, gleaned from her personal KGB. It all came to a head after Wu had her second child, a daughter. The empress visited her and played with the baby for a while, as we do, and then put her back to bed and left. Later, Gaozong took a break from duty to visit his new offspring. He found her dead. So Wu accused Wang of suffocating the baby before putting her to bed. Wu's enemies gossiped that she herself had killed the child in order to put the blame on Wu. So let's indulge in a little logic here. There are three possibilities. One, the empress actually killed the baby, or two, concubine Wu killed her own child in order to blame it on the empress. And I wonder how many people would have really cared. Or three, it was a girl. The baby perished of sudden infant death syndrome, or an inexperienced one put her down on her tummy, and Wu could think of no explanation or chose not to, other than deliberate murder. I'll go with number three. For Wang to kill the emperor's child, the risk would be enormous and the benefit quite small. This was a girl. It wasn't an all-important son. And anyway, Wu had one of those already. That's the one to kill. As far as Wu's accusations, it's completely normal to look for something or someone to blame when bad things occur, don't you? We desperately need explanations and absolution from responsibility. And if the explanation removes a rival, so much the better. Two can't be ruled out, though. Given enough time, Wu could persuade Gaozong to depose the unloved Baron Empress. But his health was poor. Wu might not have that time. If he died and Wang became the Empress Dowager, the monastery would be the best that Wu could hope for, since she was still a concubine. Shared grief brought the bereaved parents actually closer. Gaozong moved Wu into his chamber in order to console her. The empress had another bad idea. She had her mother find a sorceress to make what would, in Old Salem, Massachusetts, be called a puppet of Wu, in order to kill her remotely by sticking it with pins while chanting spells. Wang hid it in her closet and kept up with the pins and the spells every day. Wu's spy network told her all about the puppet. Witchcraft was a capital crime in China because they actually believed it at that time. Wu told the emperor, and the doll was found with Wu's birth date written on it. Both Wang and her mother were confined to quarters. The last straw was the poison wine. Wang begged so hard that Gaozong finally gave her liberty, and to thank him and prove it was all now peaceful, she invited the royal couple over for a drink. Suspicious, Wu accidentally spilled some of the wine on the floor. The wine turned black, a sure sign of poison. That did it. Gaozong told Wu to do what she liked with Wang and Zhao. One source that I read said she sent them silk cords to hang themselves with. That was pretty common. The more common story is that Wu had their hands and feet cut off and what was left thrown in a cauldron of fermented wine. This book also said they lasted for days, and of course that's impossible. Both of these scenarios are presented as a question of truth, depending on which book you read. Gaozong promoted Wu to empress in 655, now that the position was free, despite the passionate protests of the old guard ministry. Wu had her partisans as well, and they understood what Gaozong wanted and how very much he wanted. At the very last meeting at which this was discussed, one of them rather sensibly said, "This is your family business. Why ask advice?" Gaozong took that as advice and made Wu his empress consort. Gaozong took the name of Sage and Celestial Emperor, and Wu became Sage Mother and Celestial Empress, which is easily confused with her posthumous name Wu Zetian, because Tian or Xian means the heavens. And now we get to where they are ruling together and alone. Gaozong's health continued to deteriorate. As his headaches and weaknesses got worse, he relied more and more on her. She started by reading him his memorials and other correspondence, because he was almost blind at this point, and the couple would make decisions together regarding the response. After a while, she made some decisions on her own, on routine matters, and as time went on, she gradually stopped the reading, continued the decisions, and they became all hers. As she took on responsibility, the opposition to her hardened. The court divided, the nobles scorned her. Her father was a merchant, and there was religious component as well. The Confucian view of women was very clear. The purpose of women was to be useful to men. They were not to rule. The yin got more respect under Taoism, but the respect was for its softness, not a quality generally looked for in 7th century rulers. Here is a quote from the Dr. Spock of Imperial China, the Venerable Ban Zhao. She lived from 45 to 116, so a century before, several centuries before our time. Lessons for women. On the 3rd day after the birth of a girl, the ancients observed the 3 customs. First, to place the baby below the bed. Second, to give her a potsherd, which is a piece of broken pottery, with which to play. And third, to announce her birth to her ancestors with an offering. Now, to lay the baby below the bed plainly indicates that she is lowly and weak and should regard it as her primary duty to humble herself before others. To give her potsherds with which to play indubitably signifies that she should practice labor and consider it her primary duty to be industrious. By the way, Ban Zhao was female. However, new ideas were coming into China. In 645, Xuanzang had brought back over 600 Buddhist scrolls from India and translated many from the Sanskrit. Buddhism caught on like the Reformation in Europe. You didn't need to study to be a Buddhist, and salvation could be as simple as chanting Amitabh. And let us get on. And there he is. And take a quick look at him. And let me get rid of this so you can see him. Oh, I can't. Yes, I can. And now let us go to someone a little less. And here we have the iconic Bactrian camel. And you know it's a Bactrian camel. You know, when you're serving tea, you're supposed to ask 1 lump or 2. Well, the Bactrian camel has 2 lumps or humps. The Silk Road, which began in Chang'an, was impacting Chinese culture, bringing new religions and cultures from Mongolia to Persia. Women were not only riding horses astride yet, they were playing polo. Iranian and Arab women commanded their own armies. There were female monarchs in Japan and the southern part of current-day Korea, Silla. Although all this clearly demonstrated what women could do, the feeling persisted that they shouldn't. Remember, the quote from Ban Xia is firmly based on Confucius. required reading for the imperial exam. This is what the ministers had learned all through their student lives from teeny weeny. And this is what they believed, and this is why the ministers had to go. I will pass over all but one of the separate struggles, which we will get to eventually. We'll won them all in time. Now, I should mention that religions were not only expanding from Confucian to Buddhism to Taoism, but also Zoroastrians were coming in. Some of the Zoroastrians melded with some of the Chinese religions, and there was always paganism as well. There were Nestorian Christians who came in, and that made things a lot easier for them when Father Ricci showed up during the Ming. So anyhow, it was really changing. And if religion was trying to stand, the old religion was trying to stand in Wu's way, she wasn't one to be deterred. Instead, she used religion to get exactly where she wanted to be. She first called on China's ancient river goddesses and identified with them. These were very powerful goddesses indeed. They could ensure that everyone would be fed by a bountiful harvest or perish in savage floods. The first of these was Nuwa. And I think we have a slide. Yes, we do. We must have a slide of Nuwa. This part, that's her husband, Fu Shi. She had the body of a snake and the head of a woman. Oh, yeah, go away. She had made the human race from yellow earth. The Maya tried to make human beings out of mud, and it all fell down. So she had the secret. She mediated fertility and rain and tamed the floods with ash mixed with burnt reeds. She healed the sky with heated stones. Her cult became less popular with the advent of Confucianism and fell into disuse through the 6th century. Mentions of Nuwa found their way into circulation again in public encomiums from Empress Wu, written by Taizong, Zhichuan, and others. Wu, like Nuwa, was praised for mending the sky and repairing heaven, though how she did this, I'm not sure. And in these writings, she and Gaozong were described as jointly enthroned, like Nuwa and her spouse, rather than in a Confucian relation of female subservient to male. Wu also promoted her association with the goddess of the Luo River running through Luoyang. Empress Wu preferred Luoyang to crowded Chang'an, named it second capital, and spent a large slice of the treasury ornamenting the city with palaces and temples. She was criticized for this and for her frequent journeys and extended periods of residence there, particularly since Gaozong had become too weak to make the journey, which today would take 5 hours in a car with modern springs. And you can imagine what it would be like to drag a sick guy over either plank roads or dirt roads in a carriage for what, 20 hours, 30? The male bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was in the process of transitioning to the female, although it wouldn't be completed until the Ming Dynasty. We have a slide of her and him. That was the first. This is the second. Now, this is taken from the Ningbo Temple in Shanghai, which is dated 858, but the image, of course, is probably from much later. Okay. But the star of, In 688, a marble tablet was found in the Luang River, possibly made and dropped there by a cousin of Wu, which predicted that when the sage mother appears, the imperial cause will eternally prosper. It was called the Princess Diagram. She had titled herself and Gaozong sage couple. So, of course, she was sage mother shortly before. But the star of Wu's goddess avatars was Somatria. Whether the locally circulating rumor that the future Buddha would be female was prophecy or propaganda, probably the latter, planted by her pals, she embraced it and sent out the word that it applied to her. In the Longmen grottos, she had giant Buddhas carved into the rock. These things are man-made caves, by the way, with her face, would she have allowed any other woman's? And so we can probably get a good look at what she really looked like. And here she is. And she is indeed very, very beautiful. The climax was the celebration of the Feng and Shan sacrifices in 666 on Mount Tai. And the next slide will be the, yes, this is the temple of the Qin dynasty. So it was probably there at the top of Mount Tai. And this is Mount Tai. Wu had to beg her husband in a formal memorial to allow her to present the Xian sacrifice along with a group of women. The ministers were, of course, dead set against it. Somehow she got her way. Remember, this is the one at the top. Can you imagine Gaozong climbing that? Can you imagine me climbing that? This was a very big deal. In all Chinese history, only 7 emperors up to the present date have performed the ritual. The previous occasion had been 600 years before. Taizong had made attempts, but they had to be postponed because of various crises. This would be the first time women would be involved. The plains at the base of Mount Tai were filled with the tents of the retinue of thousands from the palace, and the visiting delegations from the far-flung regions of the emperor, the tribute states, and beyond. A temporary palace and 3-story altar were constructed. You know, it all worked. Fake tablets, revived goddesses, convenient prophecies, all helped promote Wu to acceptance as an empress, co-governing with Gaozong. Today, we might laugh at what we would see as primitive credulity. But any opposition to Wu could be injurious to health. As a mere siren, Wu had her spy network among the eunuchs and maids of the palace, as we spoke of before. Now she developed an official secret service with bronze receptacles for anonymous accusation set up in every town. As for the old guard who had made their, she anticipated the Inquisition. As for the old guard who had made their objections to her known, and those who might have opposed her, the fate of Uncle Chang Sun was an object lesson. Chang Sun Wuji had joined Taizong's army staff in the rebellion against the Sui. He'd urged Taizong to take action at the Xuanwu Gate. He was Taizong's foremost minister. He'd campaigned for Gaozong's selection as crown prince. After Wu became empress consort, she had her supporters in the ministry accuse Uncle Chang Sun of treason. Gaozong meekly stood aside while his most loyal and longest supporter and his brother-in-law was destroyed. father's brother-in-law. Wu demoted and exiled Jiangsu. On his way to exile, Wu sent him poison and in order to drink it, and of course he did. Other ministers were to experience far worse. Those who had never publicly opposed her continued a healthy policy of silence. Gaozong died in 683. Empress Wu had been running the country since 660. She was now the Taizong, the dowager empress. The oldest of Gaozong's sons by Empress Wu, Li Shimin, was now Emperor Zhongzong. He was 28 years old, so he didn't need a regent. But Gaozong's will had specified that he referred to his mother in all military and civil issues. Well, he didn't last 2 months. This is how she did it. Because all his ministers were subservient to his mother, he tried to appoint his father-in-law as prime minister. Might as well have somebody on your side. Wu didn't like this and sent her prime minister to remonstrate with him. He got very annoyed and said, which I paraphrase, "What's the problem? If I want to give the whole country to him," his father-in-law, "who's going to stop me?" The quote was reported to Wu, who seized on a weapon she could use against her rebellious son. She accused him of treason, i.e., planning to give the country away, and removed him in favor of a more tractable puppet, confining him to the inner palace to keep him quiet. According to the Chronicle of Chinese Emperors, published by Thames and Hudson's, which publishing house I tend to suspect because I wrote for one of their music encyclopedias, Gaozong was succeeded by Li Dong, posthumous name Ruizong. He was 22 when he came to the throne, but he was docile, content with the emperor perks, and being a figurehead for mom. His name was changed from Li to Wu, but it didn't appear on documents anyway. He wasn't even allowed free passage to the whole palace. He abdicated in favor of his mother in 690. She declared herself an emperor, ruling in her very own dynasty, the second Zhao. So here are the two guys that she got rid of. Now she was emperor at last. She gave herself a name, Zhao. Was that her name in childhood that nobody bothered to keep a record of? Was that the name that was lost when the child became a member of the harem? I like to think she heard her own name spoken before she died. You may be curious as to whether Empress Wu kept a male harem. If she did, I haven't found a mention of it, sorry. Anything about sex tends to get a mention, so probably not. I think she was more of a serial monandrist. She was probably in love with Taizong, well, who wouldn't be, and grateful to Gaozong, who got her out of the monastery. And now we're going to Ruiyang. And this is beautiful contemporary picture of it. The frequent trips and protracted trips to Ruiyang may have partially been in pursuit of privacy for her physical needs, which didn't seem to stop. From Gaozong's first strokes in 660, she had affairs with, we might as well give them a mention, Dong Baoluo, a musician who suggested to her the establishment of the Scholars of the Northern Gate, a group, and this was back in Chang'an, I think, who would have had total loyalty to her and would produce her thoughts for publication. So she wrote books, or they did. One book, Models for Minister, gave examples of the symbiosis between minister and ruler historically and extolled the dedication of the former to the latter. They also compiled a book of filial biographies, which Wu hoped would inspire her sons. Dong was eventually discarded and killed himself. Then there was Shui Huai, an itinerant street snake oil salesman. Street snake oil salesman. whom Wu, try it, picked off the streets and gave exalted status. To disguise the relationship, she passed him off at a monk, which this time only involved clipping his hair. He was arrogant, brutal, and much hated. She made him overseer for the construction of Mingtang Assembly Hall, for which 10,000 laborers were conscripted. He burned it down later in a fit of jealousy. Well, she commissioned him to build the replacement. And let's get to that hall, which is, of course, this is an artist's reconstruction of it. I think it's kind of showy. I like the other one better in the picture. She decided to change his profession, so she put him in command of an army and sent him off to find the Turks. And he expensively marched the army north, but couldn't manage to find anyone to fight, so he marched them back again. It cost a pretty penny. Wu's interest in Huai had understandably cooled, so in 694, she had a group of soldiers ambush him and beat him to death. Or it might be that everyone had enough of him and arranged the murder. Wu had his remains, you can read both. Wu had his remains ground and mixed with mud to make a pagoda. There were others, but the turning point was the Zhang brothers. Zhang Xianzong was a grandson of Gaozong's prime minister. She was now trying for the nobility this time, and he introduced his brother, Zhang Yishi. They lasted a few years, but scandalous descriptions of what we would call orgies trickled out of the palace. Wu was 80, and her health was really not up to this kind of thing. She became ill, and the ministers became nervous that the Zhang boys would persuade her to leave the succession to one of them instead of the crown prince. In February of 705, they got together and they ambushed the brothers along with 3 of their orgy pals and stuck all 5 heads on the bridge across the Luoyang River. They also persuaded Wu to quit. Her grandson, Xuanwu, took the throne, to everyone's relief. She died in December 705, 10 months after her abdication. She is buried in the Xiangling Mausoleum by Liang Mountain, Shanxi province. Well, and now we come to the assessment. Was Wu good or bad for China? Well, it depends on what you read and what the facts might be. Let's talk about the good, and it seems to be pretty good. She managed to break the clan stranglehold on the central government by democratizing the examinations. It took a while because the examinations were very competitive and there were just a few graduates, and these had to work their way up to become useful to her. She provided more educational opportunities for the people, including women. These were not small things, even if the clans did come roaring back in later years. The system of taxation was made more equitable. She advanced the cause of women, by the example of her achievement. But if she had any women ministers, I couldn't find any. She promoted silk culture, further helping the prestige of women who did this work, which was now outside the house. Tang territorial gains. Where are my territorial gains? They are here. Now, as the Silk Road went, Tang armies went behind it. Over time, a lot of this was Taizong, but she held on to it, and holding on to it was not trivial. They got as far and slightly into the Pamir Mountains. She also expanded in the other direction which do I have? Not really. Sort of, but not really. Yes, there's the northern part of it. After several ineffective invasions of Goguryeo from the north, in 668, someone, maybe she did, had the bright idea to ally with the other countries of that peninsula, Baekje and Silla, so that Goguryeo would have to fight on two fronts. This invasion was successful. They were southern. So now we've got the Tang expansion. And what did we want this? Oh, yes, here we have Silla and Baekje. And that would seem to be it on the slides. Chinese control was extended along the Silk Route, as I did, to the Tarim Basin and the Taklamakan Desert. The Turks were subdued. Eastern Mongolia came under Tang control, which extended to the west of the Pamir Mountains. The frequent invasions from Tibet were thwarted, and there was an uneasy truce. Tribute from the subjugated territories helped to maintain the prosperity of the Tang, one of the most prosperous dynasties of China, even in the face of natural disasters in the early years of the 680s. Credit is due to Wu for maintaining the peace with the new territories. The resulting saving on military expense enhanced the treasury and lessened the tax burden on the peasantry. After her reign, most of these gains were progressively lost, but it was good while it lasted. As for the bad, I've described only a fraction of the execution and outright murders Wu has been accused of. There is controversy about each and every one of them. Here is a current day assessment quoted by Mike Dash a contemporary of her assessment quoted by Mike Dash in an article for Smithsonian. With a heart like a serpent and a nature like that of a wolf, she favored evil sycophants and destroyed good and loyal officials. The quote continues with a litany of interfamily murders of which Wu is accused. Today, there's a temptation to rehabilitate her as a feminist icon and proclaim her totally innocent, if not saintly. The truth obviously lies somewhere in between, as always. We'll probably never know it for sure. And what I always say, take what you like and leave the rest. Thank you.
Jay, this was really amazing. I guess we'll open up for questions. The first question I have, so you mentioned that during the Empress Wu, reign, the women got, better rights. Is there a way maybe you or Jason can ask her, what was the women's rights at the time? In a household, in political situation, in the army, stuff like that. So is that described anywhere?
I'll cede to Jason. He probably knows much more than I do.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I'm amazed. You can put so many things, together. I like to mention about women's rights. That's a very interesting subject. One thing I'd like to mention is traditionally China doesn't have a woman's right, but China always have mother's right. Okay, so when you ascend to mother, okay, then it's different. Okay, because you have a son. Okay, so that's a different thing. Second, I like to mention Tang Dynasty. The royal family, they are not pure Chinese. Okay, they are Turks blood. So if you look at the founder, even the Sui Dynasty, Wen Di and the Yang Di, the Sui Dynasty, they are Yang family. That's a Chinese last name. But Wen Di's wife is the auntie of the Yuan. Okay, so they all marry the Turk family. So according to the historic record, in the royal court, the Tang royal court, they speak Turk as a family language. And then all the emperor in the early Tang dynasty, they all have Turkish name. So they are very non-Chinese. And as a romantic tribe, the female always more powerful, more useful, more disobedient. So you can see first, the Taizong or the Yuan, they all related to this nomadic tribe. So their concept of woman is a little bit different. So women got more influenced here. So it's not only happened in Empress Wu, right? After Empress Wu got kicked out, her son Li Dan become the emperor, but which the power is under her grandson Xuanzong. And during the time, Empress Wu, another daughter-in-law, okay, is Empress Wei, also try to have engineer a coup. Okay, so you can see through the history, the woman try to, in the early Tang dynasty, the woman try to get the power. Okay, until the grandson of Empress Wu, who is Xuanzong, right? He kind of considered as a famous, powerful emperor. But later on, he has another beautiful, lover, concubine, okay, famously called Yang Guifei, one of the most beautiful women in the Chinese history, okay. And the relationship it is, okay, this Yang Guifei, this beauty was one of his sons' concubine, okay. So you see the family relation is kind of messed up, not like a traditional Chinese. So, later on they have the long history like this. So the woman's situation is very different in Tang Dynasty. That's what I like to mention. And if you go to the National Museum in Taiwan, okay, which has a lot of painting, sculpture, and you can see it online. And you try to compare the joint picture from Tang Dynasty and the later Song Dynasty. If you look at the picture of woman, you will see the woman in Tang Dynasty is a little bit rounded, powerful, fat in today's standard, okay, and the Song Dynasty woman is skinny, okay, soft, gentle. So you can see the shift. The woman's position in Tang Dynasty, woman's dynasty, has significantly changed from the powerful woman to the tender, obedience woman. So that's I have to say, and then since this one is related to the females' right. So,
follow-up question with you, Jay. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you, Jane. Follow-up question. So there was a mention of the orgies in the court by Empress Wu. And obviously, we know about the Caligula and Nero in Roman Empire. How was the outlook in Chinese culture toward, misbehavings of the emperors and emperors and doing, sex acts like that in general? Was this something that frowned upon, or since it was a forbidden city, they weren't looked at? They were looking at the godly figures, and they can do whatever they want.
Okay, that's my favorite subject, so I cannot hold to talk about this. Okay, so in general, okay, because through the history, the orgy basics, I think that's happened, doesn't matter, okay, in every dynasty, because there's one man, all kind of woman, okay, so the emperor can do whatever they want to do, let's put it this way, okay, but especially is the Tang Dynasty. Their princess, okay, they marry, that's right, marries another noble family, but they always have kind of male concubine, okay, so kind of they call mian shou, okay, usually it's a handsome man, okay, to please the princess. That's common. Okay, so they have this kind of in the royal family. About the orgy in the Empress Wu, I think that's very interesting. That's a historic record. Okay, in her later time, I think she's approached 80s, right? Like Jen's presentation. He has two brothers, okay, Zhang brothers. They priests, they serve her on the bed. So she seems still sexual active during that age. And she's probably not enough. She has a young boy, okay, like I think it's like 20 or many. There's many boys around 15, the teenager boys, to serve her during the night. So they have the record. The prime minister had submit the notion to the emperor as an advice. I don't remember the exact word, but basically the words said, "Your Majesty, you already have Zhang brothers to serve you. I think, humbly think that's enough. I don't think you should have more teenager boys to serve you." Okay, so they have this kind of conversation. So basics, I have to honestly to say, Empress Wu is very so-called enlightened monarchy. Okay, just like Catherine the Great. Okay, she doesn't mind people openly tell her this kind of advice. She take it. Only thing she did is she sent a spy because she had to secure her position. But in general, they have a lot of people give her advice, a lot of time against her will. And she just take it, as not necessary for her. So in this way, I told Jen, if I have to rank all the Chinese emperors will probably must be around the top 10. Okay. Unfortunately, she was a woman. So Chinese historian doesn't want to rate her because she's a woman. So
well, that's a good point. So we have one question. Thank you so much, Jason. We have one question in the chat, and please don't be afraid to ask a question. If you want to be unmuted and can add something or ask a question, let us know. So I have a question from John Gallant. I was reading a book, and at a mealtime, most of the food went to the wife's in-laws, and the wife was basically starving. Why is that? What is the cultural history of this, Jason or Jane?
I have no clue on this,
Okay, so there was no, let's say, a wife of emperor would be hungry, and the parents, his parents, would always eat. There's no such thing, right? There's no concept.
Oh, I'm sorry. You talk about the general situation during the starvation?
Correct.
Okay. So I think that's it's hard to say. Okay. I actually, it's too difficult to comment on that. But basically, is when that's the situation when you don't have enough food during the famine. Who should feed first? And of course, you go to your husband, go to your son, and the wife could be the last, right? But again, it's difficult to say it's a general situation because remember, in the long Chinese history, the concept of xiao, the filial piety, is very important. So it's not unusual to starving your kids, your baby, and feed your mother. Okay, that's not unusual. So it's very difficult to. I think somebody talked about the adopted daughter. Yeah, and Emily, you probably want to comment on that because I think that's the different situation,
Well, I would like to add a little bit of something about rights of women. I read the book of the War of Three Kingdoms, and there was one episode when Liu Bei is fleeing, and he's all by himself, and he comes to a shepherd's house or a hunter's house, actually, and he's starving. And the hunter, of course, lets him in, tells him how wonderful he is, sits him down to dinner, goes into the kitchen. There isn't anything, so he kills his wife. He cuts off her arm, cooks it, and serves it for dinner. Liu Bei gets up early in the morning to continue his flight, steps over the woman's corpse, reports this act to whichever son was helping him down there. And so the hunter was sent a medal for his good act. And if this is to be taken seriously, I suspect it isn't, that would point to a rather low status for women.
Okay, I can explain a little bit. I'm just guessing, because back then there was a bad habit or something. People would buy girls or just adopt some girls and keep in their family to be used as a slavery. Slave, yeah. And then they have to work all day long and not enough food. And then the mother tend to abuse them by some strange mentality, I don't know. So because it was a bad habit, so people see that in a common situation. I don't know why. That's what I
I think that, I think thank you, Emily. I think this kind of concept even exists on the last century. Okay, Singapore's founder Li Guangyao. Okay, so he also has this position called it doesn't happen in the southern China. They're called the mother sister. Okay, so when you majie, okay, if you know Chinese. That's happening in the southern. So if in a rich family, they will have adopt a girl, kind of like a son's older sister. So we call the mother sister, between mother and the sister taking care of the son. And she have the vow not to get married. So she just kind of belong to that family, okay, and take care of that. And Li Guangyao has one of these, okay, the founder of this one. And then, of course, he treat her very, very nice, okay, just like a mother, okay. And I also personally meet a person in Singapore because the person in the home have an old lady, seems like his mother, because the man I met is over 50. So it's another one, like 60 something. Doesn't like a mother, doesn't like a sister, doesn't like a wife, and kind of the help clean and serving food. But the man treat her very nice, okay, and very with respectful, okay. So that's kind of a situation I have seen personally, okay, and still live there, okay. So that's the only thing I can say. And of course, family are different. Some people treat people nice, some are terrible, But I have seen this case, yeah.
Interesting. So anybody else has any questions while people are gathering their questions? So I guess the question for Jason and Jane. In Egyptian culture, during the rule of, I think it was 20th dynasty, when a woman became a pharaoh, she used to be dressed as a man, because there was no concept of a woman being dressed as a woman, and then therefore, having particular features, and still rule the country. Was with Empress Wu anything close to that? She ever dressed up in a male outfits, in any kind of formal function or not?
Well, I couldn't find any reference to that. Jason?
Excuse me? Yeah.
Was Empress Wu ever dressed up as a man because she was an empress and ruling the whole country?
I don't know. She dressed up as a man, but she become an emperor. Okay, so she has an emperor dress. I don't know again. And then one thing amazing is she. If you search from internet, you may find out her name is Zhao. Okay, Wu Zhao. Okay, and he created the name. he created a new character, and that character is only for her name. Okay, so that's the way she behaved. So during Tang Dynasty, I don't see. I just have to imagine she probably not. Well, she dressed as an emperor. Okay, so it's beyond man and woman. I have to assume. And.
Does anyone have any more questions? If not,
I think Lily has hands up.
Cool. Okay. One second. Let me unmute them. Okay. Unmute. Lily.
Oh, hi. How are you? Yeah, I just wanted to have more explanation about the younger woman, and she's older than her husband, because basically because the husband and the family sometimes they are rich, sometimes not really, but they want an extra like hands to get help. And sometimes maybe the husband is like only like a 3 or 4, and maybe they are very sick. They need somebody like can take care of him. So they will buy some poor girl, and will be like 5 4 years older than him. Then and she will take care of him, also play with him, and also like eventually she will become a like extra hands to the family. Then when they are like because at that time people they got married around like when they get like become like a teenager, like 13 14, so they get married. Then sometimes the husband may be only like a 8 or 10 years old, but so now the wife will take care of the husband mainly. So, and also because the mother-in-law is very mean to the new daughter-in-law, because she came from the same situation. Then what we say, like one day you will become a mother-in-law, so you will be the queen, then can rule the family. So that's what happens. So of course the poor girl is her situation is very bad, and that's why some place, like even my grandmother, but she's not she's older than my grandpa, but not really like when she was bought, like when she was very young. Then and then they have very like a small, their feet are very small, because when they were like 7 8, some book, Chinese book, they describe this. Then it will be a very suffer. They will try to let the feet broken the bones, and don't let the feet grow. Then so eventually the girl, they can only stay at home, they cannot escape, so they can't run. So that's what's the situation for these girls. So, and all the time, and all these girls, they have these their feet will be suffered. So but after I think 1910, around after that time, so we tried the women, they had more freedom. So, and they are more educated, and a lot of people they oversee, because the end of the Qing dynasty, then the government sent lots of people went overseas to study the new technology and a new culture. So that's why they brought lots of new idea came to the country. So that's why. So it's and the women had more freedom. Also, yeah, like Jason said, I don't think Wu Zetian had any like. I think her, because the dress for when she was she became an emperor, then I think it's all the same as all these, because yes, she declared she's like at the end she still became a mother, but that time I think the dress should be the same as the other emperors, right? So that's whatever I know. Thanks.
So much, Lily. There was a comment that was made. Let me just read that comment. I'd like to make up something. The bad habits or customs seem to be more popular in Taiwan. It probably was brought by Japanese or Taiwan when during the period of colonized by Japan. So I guess this, I don't know, Jason, if you can speak about that. If you've seen any kind of disparity. But I have a better question. So coming from the former Soviet Union and a communist country, anything that was negative in the history of Russia or Soviet Union, like Tamerlane or Ivan the Terrible, used to be erased or not really mentioned in our history books because not to sound crazy, but communists always thought themselves are righteous. Like, for example, Stalin pursued the idea of Spartacus, and Spartacus was the best, and he did incredible research and had a lot of Russian scientists research Spartacus to death, while in the Western history is just a blip. How was the Empress Wu portrayed by the I'd say Mao Zedong and all the other party leaders, and particularly in China and history books? Jason.
Well, I didn't grow up in China, so I don't know how Chinese depict. I grew up in Taiwan, but basically, just talk about her, But basics, I just like I think Zach probably pretty much understand my situation. I don't trust the government education, so their only purpose is tell us we are Chinese and we belong to a great country. So I tend to not trust the history.
Does Emily or maybe Lily know by any chance, or they can comment on?
Indeed, Mao was highly valued him, valued her. Let me read something from the online, but I can't see. And he said he's actually indeed in Tang Dynasty, Wu Zetian, when under her control, the country was highly united, and the economy was highly developed. So that's what we usually we will make comments for these politicians, right? So that's and he also said that he's very generous, and she's very generous. She will accept anybody if they are smart, they are useful, and she can she has intelligence, and she has intelligence of recognize people, and she will use them, and of course she also killed somebody, a lot of people. That's a lot. So that's actually Mao and highly made very high comments on her. So that's what he said. So and of course when in Wu Zetian's time, and she developed the new system about how to elect these officers. So that's really good that's why we'll push the economy went high. So that's.
Thank you so much for the insight. Any other questions? Let me see. Any other questions anybody have? Raise your hand. Anyway, I mean, Jason, Jane, you did such an incredible job. This is really beautiful, Jane, particularly. Thank you so much. So I guess, Jane, we'll discuss who our next powerful woman would be on the platform. But I want to wish everybody a nice evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and then we'll see you on our next presentation. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.